Hello.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today. Can't complain.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Very
So,
excited to be on. Sorry for the back and forth around Zoom.
well, I appreciate you taking the time out to come on to the show. I've really experienced a lot talking to guests from all over the world about travel and encouraging others to continue to travel when we can, when it is safe to do so. Some places it is, some places it isn't. So I'm trying to keep the dream alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, where are you coming in from today? Whereabouts are you located?
I am on the 75th floor of the World Trade Center in New York. Let's see if I can give you a little view here.
Wow.
It's a beautiful view. New York is my first love. So I've been here since 99 and was here when the towers went down. So it's been an emotional weekend being here 20 years later, but it's great.
We happened to be in New York City a year prior to the attacks. We've been down there many times. I love it. It's a beautiful city, a diverse community, great people, and just I happened to be visiting in Ireland when the attacks happened and just outside the Dublin airport. And with the skies being emptied of all the airplanes, it was very, very, very eerie. And then some of the Irish who drank a little bit too much were talking about World War III. My wife and I, all we could think about is our daughter back home in Canada, what
Mm.
was going to happen. We did get through it, thank God. Uh, I just on Sunday night we watched a Broadway play, Come From Away. We've seen it personally here in Toronto, but saw it on I guess it was on Apple TV. So we watched it Sunday night and brought back all those emotions again. I just love the city, and I'll never forget that day. Never forget the people. Just a beautiful, beautiful city.
It is. It is. It's amazing the resilience of this city, and so very very proud to be a part of it. And I think it made the city. New Yorkers always get the rap for being non-empathetic, and it certainly made it a very empathetic city, and served us well coming into COVID too, because never a dull moment in New York.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm honored to have on here Molly Bruttomesso. Molly has taken time out of her busy day to join us to talk a little bit about her adventures. Uh, Molly is the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at Wonderkind. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you, Randall. So happy to be here today. Yes, as you said, I'm Molly Bruttomesso. I run customer success here at this great company, Wonderkind, which is a New York-based marketing technology company. And when I'm not here, I'm mothering two kids, 7 and 3, that live in Williamsburg with my husband, who's surfer and financial analyst and is now picking up skateboarding again. So there's lots of Band-Aids and ice packs in our house these days.
So, how does that work with you working in New York City and them being home in Williamsburg?
So it's a short commute. So I'm only 20-minute commute away. We're 2 days into school time and getting back to a normal groove. And it's that's a whole other podcast, I would say, on being a working mom, but generally it works out great. I've got a great family, and I love the company I work for, so it works out pretty well.
Can you tell us a bit what you do at Wonderkind, a little bit about the company itself?
Sure. Wonderkind is a marketing technology company. We do email, text, and on-site marketing, and through an identity platform are able to give tailored experiences at a one-to-one level at scale. So a lot of fancy ways to talk about it, but essentially deliver a really tailored journey for customers coming on to the largest retailers in the world, and be able to create a really bespoke experience for them so they can find the things they want to find and buy them much easier. So it's been great. My background is actually on the agency side. Just to take a step back and to talk a little bit about my work, what I do kind of outside of my work life and my Brooklyn life. I am an avid traveler and a big off the beaten path travel evangelist, and probably the reason we're talking today. I've been lucky enough to have gone to 78 countries and counting. I grew up in Ohio and really always wanted to travel. And my mom always talked about, Cincinnati being a great place to grow up, but it was always pretty confining. So I had this dream of traveling the world. And from early days in a third grade essay where I talked about where I wanted to be in 25 years, laid out being an international lawyer, which not a lawyer, but, work in international jobs. And that's been interesting. And, that I'd been to Africa a lot. And I think Africa had been underlined like 4 times. So a lot of manifesting came, and I made a lot of life decisions that allowed me to be able to travel and see the world, which has been a life changer for me.
So you really sort of jump right into a lot of information there, which I appreciate. It just sort of gives an idea who you are, where you came from, and in your love for travel. Now, I'm going to ask you about maybe some of your greatest adventures, or maybe sometimes we find ourselves in some misadventures. So, could you sort of talk about one or the other, or both?
Sounds good. Well, I think taking a step back, it's also kind of what you're looking to get out of travel. And for me, especially in my younger years, my travel philosophy was really about seeing the world and myself in a different way when I traveled. So the travel experiences I was looking for were to kind of jar me out of my current way of thinking and my current thought processes. So I very much decided to go to places where I was either alone or in a culture that was much, much different than my own. So it forced me immediately out of my old way of thinking. And that, of course, on a shoestring budget, I started my career in advertising and started traveling when I was in college, leads to many misadventures, right? Always interesting stories when you don't have money. The most impactful one was my first major trip to Africa in the year 2000. And my best friend had been invited to come along and camp on top of a car up from Joburg all the way through the Kalahari into Botswana. And then the original plan had been to go to Zimbabwe and then come back down. And so, being somebody that loved an adventure and was fascinated by Africa, I went. And I think the budget I had for the whole trip was $700, and 600 of that was spent on the plane ticket. And landed, and we packed up these 2 tents, right? The tents popped out from the top of the SUV, and we didn't have anything other than a little bit of food, water, and started driving and went into the Kalahari. Every day there was adventures and near-death experiences, but we went into Botswana in the Subudi area and the Okavango Delta, but sort of a little bit north where it starts becoming more rugged. And it was off season. So we went in through kind of the gate, and you're going into an area that's as big as Switzerland, right? And we were the only ones signing into the park that day. And it was off season, right? So nobody was really there. It was 2000, Botswana wasn't really on the map. And we only had a regular SUV, right? So we start going, and we're probably only a mile into the trek, right? And we're heading towards a campsite that we had identified was the only one that was in that Subudi area that was within our budget, right? Just a regular campground that you set up tents on versus the more kind of luxury lodges. At the time, there was one luxury lodge there where I think Michael Crichton wrote Jurassic Park from there, just to give you a sense of the inspiration. So we end up getting stuck in the mud a mile in, and the car would not go. So one of our other travel companions, a French guy, had to walk back the mile with a stick through lion country and come back, and we're pulling the car out of the mud and getting help and traction. We get the car out, we get to this camp, which has been trampled by elephants at this point. And now it's dusk because we've been stuck in the mud. And we go to this Game Stoppers camp and beg them to give us a special rate, which the special rate I think was still $500 a night. So it was out of the question. And they said, well, there's this village of researchers you can go to that are, around here, and maybe they'll let you park there and set up camp. So we went over there. They spoke French. Our French companions, two guys that we were with that were in the other tent, they did the talking, and they said, these guys are Tootsie Fly researchers. We're allowed to park here. We go to bed in the tents. And I'm awakened by my friend shaking me and saying, Molly, wake up, you're about to die. And sure enough, there was an elephant the size of a brontosaurus, definitely Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park era, who is looking into our tent, with this huge eye, and doing the 3 stages of an elephant charging, which are raise it. First, they stomp their foot, then they flap their ears, and then they lift up their trunk. And he was at the 3rd stage. We slithered out the back of the car and ran, and the elephant trampled actually the teepee next to it of one of the people in the camp, who luckily had also snuck out the back. So this led to, we couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It turns out we had been blocking the water source that some of the elephants would come into at night, that was the latrine for the camp. We, of course, don't realize this and are running around the camp trying to stay away from the elephants. And in very broken English, the other folks in the camp are telling us that we shouldn't be worried about the elephants, we should be worried about the other things. So the next morning, we make it through the night, and we're driving, and we get out of this area, and they say, we get to the next checkpoint, and they say, where did you sleep? The campground's been trampled. So my friend and I say, oh, well, we slept with at the Tootsie Fly researchers camp. And they said, there's no Tootsie Fly researchers. And the guys go, oh, we sort of did a white lie. They're actually lion trackers, because the biggest and most ferocious lions are in that area, and they've been taking people. And so they're tracking them and tagging them to understand that. So little did we know, we're terrified of the elephants. We're running around the camp and basically lion bait running around. So it was one of our many adventures on that trip, but that trip also made me fall in love with travel, being in nature, the circle of life. There is something magical about the soil in sub-Saharan Africa, and being one that is hard to put your finger on, and definitely gives you that bug to continue traveling.
Sounds like quite the adventure. I just getting a visual in my head of first the elephant, and then come to realization the next day that maybe I should be afraid of the elephants. I should have been afraid of the lions they were tracking. But it is one of those things to be out there and to be outside your elements, and to be able to experience it, be able to come back, and it changes your life from what I've heard. I'm looking at going to, well, we have plans to go to South Africa in September of 2022. Hope that goes through. It's been postponed because of what we're going through, but it's paid for. All we're doing is waiting for the all clear to go. Be our first trip to part of Africa, and then maybe not our last. But just hearing your story, I'm like, yeah, I think maybe I'll just go to the zoo.
No, I've been back many times since, but it is the one place that that trip was amazing, but I have always since then gone through a travel agency, and a woman that I work with that is half Zambian, and she helps organize trips there. It's not the place you want to go totally solo without a plan, but glad to have lived and told the tales, and it still is. Don't let it deter you. There's great ways to do Africa, but definitely you have to spend a little bit more than I think that $700 I mentioned.
Sounds like there's a book in that story.
I will say the best friend that I went with, we are the only ones that didn't like the book Eat, Pray, Love, because we feel like we traveled the world and wrote a lot of those and got over a lot of heartbreak on many of our international trips. And we're like, we probably should have written that book. And there's probably a little bit of spite in not liking the book. Regret.
Now, one thing I've learned during this pandemic is that there's a lot of people that are taking a nomadic digital journey, learning that they don't have to be confined to an office tower or a workplace. They can do their work anywhere they have Wi-Fi. What are your thoughts on this new realization, I guess it is?
I think it's been one of the positives coming out of COVID. I like to consider myself a little bit of a boundary walker in a world with a lot of boundaries, being a mom with two kids. And we were able to live 3 months of the last year in Costa Rica in one of these digital nomad towns. And I think I think the trend has been there before, but it's been relegated to I'm a freelancer, I'm sort of a loner, or it's this trade-off between your career and there's nobody that wants to be C-suite necessarily that you're finding in these digital nomad towns. And it's more of the engineers or the copywriters or the graphic designers that have chosen a different path. But there isn't this ability to say, I want to be C-suite and I'd like to live part of the year in a place that is not absolutely freezing. In New York, I love, but in January and February, it's not great, right? So I think COVID has really opened people up to the fact that you don't need to be in a single place. I was there in Q1 and our team delivered our best quarter to date in Q1 while I was there. So I think even for us, we're a very progressive company. Travel is very much encouraged, but it was still eye-opening to our CEO and my boss that I was able to deliver those results. And it was really interesting for me as well, because I am a big come to the office person. I get a lot done. I get a lot of energy off of other folks, but being able to be away and be in a place where I had some outlets in nature and was able to kind of get out of my own head once the workday was done allowed me to be productive and allowed me to accomplish different types of work than I do when I'm in New York. So I think it's a great trend. And then I hope it continues to be available to folks that aren't just in those more individual contributor roles.
I find now that even in my own personal life, the job that I have is with the federal government, and we're learning that the biggest expense is real estate, and
Mm-hmm.
they are rethinking their footprint. I know at one time we had a lot of people that were working from home, and again, they did an evaluation of real estate, and they said, we're paying for the real estate. Where are the people? So they brought everybody back. And about 2 years later, we had this thing come, this elephant in the room, I'll call it, and they're back at home again. So maybe,
Was the elephant charging? That's the question, Randall.
yes, yes. Now, usually when I have these interviews, I ask sometimes an easy question or difficult question. I think this might be an easy one. As a traveler, can you tell us where you had the best food experience and why?
It's funny, Randall. I bet that is an easy question. It's one of the harder ones for me because I'm not necessarily a foodie traveler. So My experiences where I've had amazing food have been very much where the set and setting, I've been in somebody's home that I was invited into in Swaziland, or in Beirut with friends that had lived there. Uh, so I don't have anything that stands out. I do have some misadventures on food, which I could maybe get into. But I would just say, for hands down food, the Basque Coast is just outstanding. So be it a nice Michelin starred restaurant in San Sebastian, or a small tapas bar, just the way that they prepare food, the flavors, it's just incredible. So it's also a nice one for me. My husband, as I mentioned, loves to surf, and there's a little town called Mundaka in the Basque Coast, and it has a perfect point break, wonderful food, cute little streets. So it's a nice one to combine all the different passions.
I can say that my one of my best food experiences happened in Paris. And what
Mm,
happened is we're in a restaurant. It was around 10 o'clock their time. And both my wife and I were in a country we don't speak the language. The menu was all French, trying to communicate with the owner, who was also the cook. He would keep on bringing out samples of his food that he makes particularly for that time of day, showing us this is what you want, this is what you want, basically. And it's thank God, I think within 40 minutes, a busboy came in. He spoke English and French. He was able to give us the laydown of the menu. We had a great meal. We thanked the owner, tried to have a conversation using the busboy as a translator. It was a good time, but it was a good memory too. So food was good. He went out of his way to try to show us what he can make. And I was tempted to eat a lot of it, but I thought it better not because I just wanted to make sure that we were getting what we wanted. And it was a great experience. And I will never forget that.
that's an amazing one. We had the first time my husband met my parents, we were in Paris and we went to a fancy restaurant. And the similar setup to that, right? The menu was in French, the waiters only spoke French, but it was a pretty big restaurant, right? So I'm sure they spoke a little English. But then from there, the story twists, because my boyfriend and now husband always likes to order the most kind of fringe thing on the menu. So he ordered the pigeon, which is also spelled pigeon in French. And so he points to it and says, "I'll take pigeon." And the waiter looks at him and kind of gives this very classic French quizzical look. And he starts going, "Pigeon, pigeon, pigeon," all the different
Yeah.
pronunciations that you could possibly do. The waiters, I think he had to know that that he was meeting the parents for the first time, because he makes the show of it. There's people turning around. He pulls over the other maitre d', and who has my husband point to it on the menu, what it is, and goes, "Ah, pigeon." Exactly the way we had been saying it. Oh, and then brings out the pigeon. It was just so funny. It was a great food experience, in that it was, if you had done a movie scene that played out what French waiters are supposed to do when they meet American tourists, that's what it was.
That's a funny story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
My other misadventures, I used to travel for work extensively. I had this great job where I worked for an ad agency, but I worked on developing markets for Procter and Gamble, and really helping them develop products for women in the poorest billion. So instead of developing products for first world countries and reverse engineering them, they were actually working on what are the insights, and how do people in the Philippines and in China and in Kenya do their laundry, and how can we develop better products for them and their needs. So it was a fascinating job. That's a whole different story. But as a result, I would travel for business to these places, and I would be kind of the guest of honor, right? And Philippines was a large market for us, as well as China. So I had the benefit of going there, both amazing countries, love them. However, being the guest of honor at a Filipino restaurant was interesting, because you get to have the bull's testicles, and you get to have all these other parts of the animal prepared. And they had to go, Molly, you're just never going to believe that this is bull's testicles. Taste it, right? And I would taste it, and I was like, I had no imagination of what it was going to taste like, but it was as bad as I thought it would. So it was always an interesting adventure in those countries, being the guest of honor there. But again, a fun experience to have, but not the meal that I sit and dream about and think about having as my last, like I did in the Basque Coast.
What advice would you give today's travelers as the world is starting to open up again for travel? Uh, any advice there for those new travelers, I call them?
Really the same advice you give about planting trees, right? What was the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? What's the second best today? And, I think the same thing about travel. A lot of people don't know where to start. And I think you start with what transformation you want for yourself, right? What do you want your end state to be at the end of your trip that's different than now? And that really changes your approach and what you decide to do. You don't lay out where you want to go, and you lay out what experience, what transformation, what feeling you want at the end of your trip. And then you look at what might be able to meet that, right? We're in a different era with COVID, but I think it's also made it much more, what's the right word, creative, as far as thinking about places that are maybe closer to home that could give you that same experience, exploring our own national parks, right? Or looking at smaller towns that might be able to give you that same feel that you're looking for with a more round the world adventure that you might not be able to have. I also, a lot of my friends, I love these sort of Jeffersonian dinners where you sit around and ask these questions, everything from what one world event would you change and would you change it, to what Netflix show would you live in, right? But one of the ones we've been asking lately is what trip would you do for your 40th or your 50th or your 60th? Like, what's that next bucket list? And then starting to kind of plan back from there. So just starting to think again about what are those big things on your bucket list, get you excited about, again, what transformation you want, what would excite you. And getting excited about travel again can be as good as actually traveling again.
I agree with you there. And what I found over the course of doing this podcast since June of 2020 is to talk more of domestic travel. So people trying to not venture too far from home, like you suggested, but they're visiting places that they never thought of before. Like it could be a city or a town or mountains or a lake or something that they've maybe driven by many times but never took the time to stop. So I like to see that, encourage people to do that. If they're not ready to take that big step and go international, at least get out there and explore your own backyard.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point of things that you've passed before. Even Costa Rica, we were there for a couple months, and we never have stayed in the same place for a couple months, right? We just never do that. We're be one place one night, pack the bags, keep it moving, right? And so just going deeper in the places that you are going to and discovering new is great. We had this week off, the last week, gap week of school, and we just got in the car and drove up and went up to Maine and went to Acadia, stayed in a camp situation that had beautiful nature in itself. It's not lions, right? But beautiful, beautiful nature with bald eagles flying over you. And we probably wouldn't have never prioritized and done that if it weren't for the state of the world. So I think just starting with what is possible and doing it. And the mind clearing really happens regardless of if you're near or far, as long as your intention is to get there.
Just recently, my wife and I, we decided we would do a driving trip. And Ontario, where we live, is a big province, and we have a lot to see here. And my wife said, I'm going to take you to the West Coast. And I thought she meant to British Columbia. No, Ontario has a West Coast, and that's Lake Huron. So I got to
Ah,
go in. First we started off in Sarnia and made our way up north and a place called Tobamori. And when they take you out on an open boat or a glass bottom boat trip, they have a couple old wrecks from the 1800s, shipwrecks that lie just below the surface. They could just skim over the top of them. And that was amazing to see. And the fact that now the borders are open for Americans to come up, we could see a lot of Americans using their cottages up there too. So it was good to have that little bit of explore my own backyard. Never been up in the area before, and watching the sunset on the west coast of Ontario was just amazing. So didn't have to go too far, and still had an amazing experience.
e- exactly. It's the mindset, right? And thinking in your own backyard. It's been interesting having kids. We've become much more focused on things in close time zones, having lived and learned about the struggles of jet lag with kids. And there's that seeing the world through their eyes and seeing, one of the pieces is it's like anybody can be wowed by being in India in this small town, and just everything is different. The smells are different, the colors are different. But being a traveler that can go to another neighborhood, right? Go to Flushing in Queens, which is 10 minutes away from us, and have that same fresh eyes and wowness. That's amazing, right? And kids kind of transfer. I'm not great at that, right? My kids are great at that, and seeing it through their eyes has been has been one of the joys of motherhood.
I have one fond memory. Well, I have many fond memories, but one I could reflect on. This is taking a Jersey. We're driving to New York City, and we took the New Jersey Turnpike. As I'm driving, I can see the New York skyline, and my wife just yells at me, "Keep your eyes on the road," because it was. I've always seen it in movies. That so my first experience was surreal. It was like the river was in the way. Like, come on, let me get over there. I want to be there now. Again, I've already told you, New York is a beautiful city. I love it. I miss it. I miss America. We spent a lot of time traveling the states. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people. Our border into the states is closed right now for driving. We can fly, although my wife and I we like to do short trips, so we usually visit like Pennsylvania, New York, even all up to Maine, a beautiful place up
Mhm.
there. So we like those drives and visit good old Boston. I like Boston; it's a good area. Now, before we wrap this up, we're going to ask you one question here. You take as much time as you like to talk about it, but this is an opportunity for you to share with our listeners what you maybe something you want them to know about you, or something that in the future that you might be working on that our listeners could might be interested. I think they would be.
Well, right now, I am, as I mentioned, with Wonderkind, and in this amazing journey, we've been growing incredibly fast. And our team, the customer success team, and we manage all of our clients out of this team, has been growing at incredible leaps and bounds. So I am working tirelessly to make sure that my team is growing and we're ramping and that we're scaling at the level. And also, many of these teammates, it's their first or their second jobs, maybe their third, but they're early in their careers. And there's a lot of pieces that in the technology space in New York, you're at the beginning, right? And there's not a ton of diversity in big tech. And I consider it a point of pride of making sure that we're helping this new generation to have this incredible place to work where you can bring your full selves to work, where you can be on podcasts and talking about travel and things that don't have to do with your day-to-day job, and that you can encourage really bringing those other sides to yourself to work. So that's what I'm working on now. In the future, I always I have a few ideas percolating, but I'm not going to talk about it. But definitely, as far as travel is concerned, I joke we have these great coaches, performance acceleration coaches in our company, which is just so cool that we have that, right? And they talk about what do you want your next role at the company to be, and I always say I'm super happy where I am, but if we start sabbaticals again, once the world goes back to normal, I would like to be the head sabbatical planner. So maybe if that happens, if anybody that's listening here comes and joins us at Wonderkind, I'll either be running customer success or maybe the sabbatical planner. So there's nothing I love more and that's more rewarding. I think we're of like minds here, Randall, on hearing about people's travels and helping them to enjoy travel more. It's incredibly rewarding.
Well, Molly, I want to thank you for being on the show today. It's encouraging to hear your story. Uh, I'll be watchful when I'm in Africa for elephants that might be coming towards my tent, and maybe that might be the least of my worries.
3 stages, 3 stages. You're okay if it's just the foot stomping.
Yeah, you got me there. So I'll be mindful of that. So I do appreciate the heads up. And I want to thank you for being on the show today. And any final thoughts?
No, thank you so much. And I would love to hear more on your travels and your stories. So this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time and being on the show.